Ancient civilizations you've never heard of. Ancient history is often associated with Rome, Greece, or Egypt. But beyond the great empires, there were dozens of amazing states that only specialists remember today. Their power could span entire regions. Their rulers formed alliances and waged wars against the giants of their time. And their legacy is still hidden in chronicles and archaeology. Today we will talk about 4 such examples. Celtic Galatia in the heart of Asia Minor, the rich trading Sogdiana on the crossroads of the Silk Road, Numidia, a kingdom of cavalrymen in North Africa, and the mysterious Muisca Confederation in South America. Where did they come from? Where did they go? And did they leave any mark on the present? It's going to be interesting, as always. Galatia is perhaps the most unexpected Celtic fragment of the ancient world. When we say Celts, we usually think of Britain, Ireland, or Gaul. But in the 3rd century BC, one of the tribal unions ended up in the center of Asia Minor. How did they get there? It all started with the Great Celtic Migration. After Alexander the Great's victory and the weakening of his empire, Celtic tribes from the Danube moved to the Balkans. They ravaged Greece, besieged Delphi, and reached Thrace. Part of these tribes, led by the chieftains Brennus, Leonorius, and Letarius, crossed the Bosporus by invitation of the Anatolian kings, those who wanted to use the warlike Celts as mercenaries against their neighbors. At first, the Galatians existed just like that, as a fearsome force hired for conflicts by the rulers of Bithynia, Pergamon, or the Seleucids. But very soon, the Celts developed a taste for new lands and captured the central plateau of Asia Minor themselves. Here, among the hills and steppes, they settled, subjugating the local population and dividing the territories into 3 tribal districts: the Tecticiges, Trachmiae, and Talistobogii. Thus, Galatia was born. The peculiarity of Galatia was that it was a Celtic society surrounded by Greek civilization. The Galatians preserved their traditions: the warrior cult, tribal nobility, druid-like priests. But at the same time, they actively interacted with the Hellenistic world, traded, formed alliances, and gradually adopted the Greek language and culture. To the Greeks, they remained barbarians, but quite civilized barbarians. Relations with neighbors were turbulent. The Galatians repeatedly harassed the coastal cities of Asia Minor, exacted tribute from Pergamon, and even threatened the Aegean coast itself. In response, the Pergamene king Attalus I defeated them several times and secured the title Savior of Hellas. Nevertheless, the Galatians remained an influential military force to be reckoned with. By the 2nd century BC, Galatia had turned into a kind of buffer between major powers: the Seleucids, Pergamon, Pontus, and later Rome. The Galatians could be allies or enemies, depending on the political situation. In 189 BC, the Romans during the Galatian War finally defeated the Celtic army near their capital, Ankara, and from then on, Galatia effectively became dependent on Rome. In the 1st century BC, the Galatians became allies of the Romans in their wars with Mithridates of Pontus. For their loyalty, they got formal autonomy, and their rulers even received the title Kings of Galatia. But this did not save the country from gradual integration into the Roman system. In 25 BC, the last king died without an heir, and Emperor Augustus turned Galatia into a Roman province. And yet, Galatia left its mark. The Celtic presence in Asia Minor lasted for several centuries, and even in the early Christian era, the locals retained a memory of their origin. The Apostle Paul wrote his famous epistle to the Galatians precisely to this area. And for the early Christians, the word Galatians meant Celts living among Greeks and Romans. Archaeology confirms that Celtic elements in weaponry and burial rites persisted in Galatia for a long time. Our next guest is Sogdiana. This is not a unified state, but rather a network of rich city-states in the heart of Central Asia. Its lands stretched between the Sir Daria and Zarafshan rivers, and its centers were the cities of Samarkand, ancient Marikanda, Bokhara, Panjakent, Kesh, now Shahrasabs, and a number of others. It was they who made Sogdiana one of the key points on the Great Silk Road. And we already have a separate video about one of the cities in Samarkand. The origins of these settlements go back to the 1st millennium BC. Archaeology shows that even then, Fortified settlements with irrigation and trade existed in the oases of the Fergana Valley and the lands of the Zarafshan. Fertile lands and a convenient location at the crossroads made Sogdiana a rich and coveted prize for conquerors. Alexander the Great called Maracanda the Pearl of the East, and its fortress had to be taken by storm. The peculiarity of Sogdiana was that it was a trading civilization. Sogdian merchants dominated the caravan routes for centuries, linking China, India, and Persia. They were the intermediaries in the trade of silk, spices, silver, and horses. Their language, Sogdian from the Iranian group, became a kind of Latin of the Silk Road. Documents in it are found from Persia to China. The cities of Sogdiana were cosmopolitan. At all times, Iranians, Scythians, Turks, Indians, Chinese, and later Arabs lived here. The Sogdians themselves were flexible. They easily adopted foreign cultural elements but retained their own identity. The wall paintings in Panjaikan depict scenes from Indian epics, Iranian legends, and even Buddhist stories, a true cultural blend. Relations with neighbors were complex. First, Sogdiana fell under the rule of the Achaemenids. Then it was conquered by Alexander. Later, it passed from the Seleucids to the Kushans, from the Hephthalites to the Turkic Khaganates. But under any conquest, the Sogdian cities retained relative autonomy. It was too profitable to have merchants nearby who could link the empire with distant markets. However, this cultural flexibility played its role. The main blow was dealt by the Arab conquests in the 8th century. After bloody uprisings, Samarkand and Bokhara submitted to the caliphate. The Sogdian language was displaced by Persian, and the elite quickly became Islamized. By modern times, the Sogdians had dissolved among other peoples, Tajiks and Uzbeks. Nevertheless, their trace is huge. It was the Sogdians who brought Buddhism from India to China and were the first to bring silk there. Their language influenced Turkic writing, and many cities like Samarkand and Bokhara continue to live today, reminding us of the trading greatness of ancient Sogdiana. But that's all the Middle East. Let's start moving beyond the mainstream. Numidia was a state that emerged in North Africa in the 3rd century BC on the lands of modern Algeria and Tunisia. For the ancient world, it was primarily the homeland of magnificent cavalry, which for centuries made the Numidians famous as one of the best horsemen of antiquity. Initially, Numidia was not a unified state. Tribes lived here whose relation to modern Berbers is not precisely established. They were united by a nomadic and semi-nomadic economy, livestock herding, and life in the mountain and steppe regions of the Maghreb. Cities were rare, and the center of life was in tribal unions. But it was this society that gave the world a unique military force, light cavalry without a saddle or bridle. The Numidians controlled horses with their voice and a stick, and in battle they were lightning fast. A raid, a volley of javelins, and an equally quick retreat, classic nomadic cavalry tactics. At first, Numidia was in the sphere of influence of Carthage. Numidian horsemen participated in many of its wars, including in Hannibal's campaigns. Polybius noted that it was the Numidian cavalry that repeatedly saved the Carthaginians from complete defeat. But over time, the Numidian kings began to play their own game, maneuvering between Carthage and Rome. In 202 BC, after the Second Punic War, the king of the Massiliae, Massinissa, made an alliance with Rome. He united the tribes and effectively created a unified Numidian kingdom with its capital in Cirta, a former Phoenician city. This was an epoch-making event. For the first time, a centralized Berber state was formed from disparate nomadic unions. Massinissa pursued a policy of settlement, encouraging nomads to farm and build cities, but most importantly, he made Numidia an important ally of Rome in the region. However, this friendship was not always without conflict. After Massinissa's death, his heirs repeatedly interfered in Roman affairs. The most famous was King Jugurtha, whose war with Rome at the end of the 2nd century BC went down in history. Jugurtha fought skillfully, bribed Roman senators, and for several years held back the might of the Roman armies. But in the end, he was defeated by Gaius Marius and betrayed by his friend Bacchus, the king of Mauritania. After Jugurtha, Numidia still retained formal independence but gradually turned into a Roman client. In the 1st century BC, Part of its lands was annexed to Roman provinces, and in 46 BC, after Caesar's victory over Pompey's supporters in Africa, Numidia finally became part of the Roman state. Why didn't Numidia survive? The reason is simple. It had neighbors that were too powerful. Carthage and then Rome inevitably dragged it into their conflicts. Moreover, statehood here relied on the charisma of individual kings, like Massinissa. Without a strong leader, the Numidian tribes easily fragmented, and the Romans took advantage of this. Nevertheless, Numidia left a noticeable mark. The Numidian cavalry became the standard for light cavalry. Its tactics influenced the Roman army and served as a model for future equestrian peoples for a long time. Archaeology has preserved the remains of Numidian cities, including Cirta, modern Constantine, where traces of ancient structures can still be seen. Our last guests for today will be the Muisca, one of those pre-Columbian American states that are rarely remembered today, although in their era they were no less significant than the Aztecs or Incas. The Muisca lived in the territory of modern central Colombia, in the high Andes, on the plateaus of Cundinamarca and Boyaca. Their union is called the Muisca Confederation, which existed from approximately the 8th to the 16th century. The main feature of the Muisca was an alliance of tribes and chiefs, not a unified centralized state. They had two main centers, Bocata in the southern area, now Bogota, and Hunza in the north, now Tunja. Besides them, there were other influential chiefs. They all recognized a common cultural identity but maintained autonomy. Such an alliance made the Muisca flexible. They could unite for wars or trade but were not rigidly subordinate to a single center. The Muisca were famous as masters of gold working. Their craftsmen created amazing jewelry and figurines from gold, copper, and alloys, used in rituals and as symbols of power. The Muisca are associated with the legendary tale of El Dorado. The Spaniards heard about a ritual where a chief would cover his body in gold dust and immerse himself in Lake Guadavita, offering gifts to the spirits. The legend was enriched by the conquistadors' fantasies and became a symbol of a mythical golden city. The Muisca economy was based on agriculture in the mountain valleys. Corn, potatoes, quinoa, beans. They skillfully used terraces and irrigation. Trade connected them with neighbors. They exchanged salt, emeralds, and textiles for tropical products. The Muisca were virtually monopolists in salt and emeralds in the region, which gave them enormous wealth. Unlike the Aztecs or Incas, the Muisca did not build giant stone structures. Their sanctuaries were more often sacred lakes and hills, and their rituals included sacrifices, including human ones. The Muisca's neighbors were peoples of the Andes and tropical forests, but their confederation had no serious competitors. This is precisely why the Muisca did not create a powerful military machine. Their wars were local and rarely went beyond the plateau. This feature played a cruel trick when the Spaniards appeared. In 1537, Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada arrived in the region with a small detachment of 800 men. Despite the Muisca's numerical superiority, their fragmentation and weak military organization made resistance ineffective. Within a few years, the Confederation collapsed, and the Muisca lands became part of the Spanish New Granada. Nevertheless, the Muisca legacy is alive. Their descendants are part of the modern Colombian people. Many place names in the region have Muisca origins. The images of their gods and the symbolism of golden figurines have become part of Colombia's cultural identity. And in Bogota, there is a gold museum entirely dedicated to the Muisca's gold craftsmanship. And these were far from all the little-known kingdoms and civilizations of antiquity. There's enough material here for a whole series. If this interested you, or if you have your own ideas for videos, you know what to do below the video. See you next time, friends.